Good evening. So great to see all of you here this evening. A lot of people here that aren't usually here for a break night, and that's always good. And in fact, we have a lot of people here who aren't necessarily Christians. We have people who are Jews. For the speaker this evening, the chosen people. And it reminds me of what Lincoln called us, the Christians, the almost chosen people. Well, we're all here together tonight, and that's the main thing. And if you'll recall, when this church began as the first church in Pinehurst, it was the only place for people to worship God at all. And we had Jews, Roman Catholics, and Protestants here under one roof. Not at the same time. That would be nice, but still under one roof. And I'm so glad to have all of you here this evening. This is a special evening. And before I go any further, I would like to recognize our chef for the evening, Sunny Brenner. She's been such a blessing to us. Thank you, Sunny. Yes. Well, tonight is a special evening. It really is. When I met Ralph about 6 months ago, I couldn't believe that I lived here this long and had not met him yet. And it made me wonder when I heard his story, how many other people do we have here in this community who've got these incredible stories to tell? And I don't want to have to hear about them in their obituary. You know, I want to hear it while they're alive. And he has a witness of history that I think many people have. And that's what we're here tonight, to hear an eyewitness testimony of what it was like to live in Nazi-occupied Germany. And then to come to this country as a boy and to experience what that was like. And I'll just give you a brief rundown. Ralph Jacobson, our speaker this evening, was born January 15th, 1928 in Osnabrück, Germany. I took 5 semesters of German in college, by the way. You wouldn't know. And he came to the United States in January of 1939. He graduated from Bayside High School in 1945 in New York, and then attended the City College of New York, graduated cum laude. And in 1949, he went to NYU Law School, graduated again, of course, cum laude. Then he served in the United States Army from 53 to 55, and then for 32 years, he was the senior attorney for Sears and Roebuck. Maybe you've heard of that. In Chicago. He was admitted as an attorney to the bars, not only in New York, but also Illinois and North Carolina. Quite a feat. 3 bar exams. Did you have to take all of them? Yeah, I mean, most of us, if you just pass one, you just praise God that you got through and you say, I never want to take another multiple choice test again. Ralph and his wife Vivian moved to Pinehurst in 1990. And by the way, Vivian, I don't know how much she'll be speaking tonight, but we want to get her here again. She is probably the leading expert in the United States on the artist Marc Chagall, the Jewish artist. He was the one who did the Fiddler on the Roof. And so I want to hear about that. So what we don't hear tonight, maybe we'll hear it again later. They came to Pinehurst in 1990. Volunteer service for the community has been extensive, and he served on the board of the Moore Parks Foundation for SCORE and the Weymouth Center for the Arts and Humanities Music Committee. He's practiced law in North Carolina, as he's allowed to do, but he's done it without pay, pro bono. Tonight he'll talk to us with the assistance of slides regarding his childhood in Nazi Germany in the 1930s, including Kristallnacht. And I think most of you are familiar with that terrible event, Kristallnacht. This Friday will be the 80th anniversary of Kristallnacht. Okay? That was in November 9th, 1938, when the Nazis did their best to break every window that Jewish people had, their businesses, and I suppose their houses too. Is a kind of terrorism. And also his father, Ralph's father, was murdered by the Nazis in that same year. The election of Hitler in 1933 drastically changed the lives of every Jewish family, with Jewish businesses being looted, the destruction of synagogues, and shopping and attendance was forbidden in public places for the Jews. And so Ralph is going to be here this evening and with Vivian to talk to us. He has given this lecture in schools and to other civic groups throughout North Carolina. Will you welcome this evening Ralph Jacobson?
Thank you very, very much for that kind introduction. Excuse me for sitting, but I'm unable to stand and make this presentation. I'm going to start by showing this picture of me and my parents, and this was taken probably in about 1935 or 36 when I was 8 years old. So we go to the next one. I just wanted to show you how typically German I am dressed. Now, this is a photograph. I wish I had it in a better form, but the town of Osnabrück was a very, very strong Nazi town. All the officials were early backers of Hitler, and so it was not possible for me to go to public school. So we had about 40 students in 1934 when I started school. And this is a picture of the one-room schoolhouse, schoolroom, the teachers on the right. And when I started school in 1934, there were still about 40 of us, and every year people left, parents left with the children, so by the time I left, there were probably only about 15 left. My sister is in this picture as well as I am. My sister was 4 years older. Going to school was a big problem already in 1934 because we were chased and called bad names, but we were never beaten or harmed physically. But it certainly was a tough trip from our house to the school every morning. Next picture. Now, this is just to show you, this is a house we lived in, and my father had his law offices on the first floor, and we lived on the second and third floor. You can see the entrance is way on the right-hand side, and that was the entrance for his law office and also for us to go upstairs. The reason I show this, because in 1933, right after Hitler came in, suddenly two very tall, uniformed SS troopers came and stood in front of the office to keep his clients away from going into the office. And they were there for many, many, many weeks, and they were there early. So when my sister and I left for school, we had to walk past them. Now, this is a very important picture for many reasons. Here were 7 of us. Again, I apologize that the photo isn't any better, but you can see a clear photo of it in several of these books. Now, these are 7 young men, obviously, from our classroom, and I'm way on the left-hand side. The 3 young men next to me were all killed in concentration camps. The 2 on the right were able to survive, and the 3rd one from the right was in a concentration camp for 4 years as a laborer, was able to survive and actually moved back. You could pass this around, actually.
Yeah, why don't we?
Now, the young man in the middle is Peter. His true name is Peter von Peltz. And in about 1936, 1937, he and his parents, he being an only child, moved to Amsterdam. And Mr. Van Peltz and Anne Frank's father went into business together. So when the Nazis invaded Holland, they hid, the 2 families hid upstairs. So this is Peter. When you read the diary of Anne Frank, and she writes about Peter, this is Peter as a young man and student with me in our school.
And you're on the right. You're on the right here.
I'm way on the left. Every picture I'm going to show you, I'm the shortest one. Now we're going to talk a little bit about my father. This is his graduation certificate from law school, and it's in Latin. It's in Latin. Next, please.
What year was that?
Yeah.
We have a
The
date.
next picture. Now this is dated 1905, and he passed his bar exams with the grade of good, but that's the highest grade you could get. And this is dated 1905. This is to become a notar. In Germany, when you go to law school, you become an Anwalt or lawyer. But after many years and passing a very tough exam, you become a notar, and then you get a doctor title. So my father became Dr. Jacobson after passing this exam in 1905. And he's congratulated by the King of Germany in 1911. I'm sorry, in 1905 he became a lawyer, and in 1910 he passed his notar exam, and he got this letter in January of 1911 from the King of Germany. Now we come to the sad part. In 1933, of course, Hitler was elected, and one of the first things he did was to disbar all notars from practicing in the highest courts and for the highest number of cases, the highest class of cases in Germany. So here's a 3-line letter saying that he can no longer practice as notar, and they're taking away his doctor title. And on the lower left it says Abschied, which is really goodbye. Now, this is a picture of our synagogue, and this was built in about 1910 by a famous Christian architect, designed and it was a magnificent, magnificent building. Way on the left, you can see another big building, and I'll cover that a little later because that's a government building. But here's our synagogue. You can imagine how high that was. Now, there was a famous Jewish painter by the name of Nussbaum who was from Osnabrück, and he painted this painting, which is very famous, of our synagogue and the inside of the synagogue. So you can see how tall and how high and how beautiful the synagogue was. Magnificent buildings, separate seating for the men and the women. It was an Orthodox type synagogue, and so we had a rabbi, we had a cantor, we had services every Saturday, of course. Okay, the next picture. Now, we come to 1938.
Do you want a little bit of water?
In 1938, early in the year, there was more and more and more anti-Semitism and action against the Jews. The first thing, starting actually in the mid-30s, 35, 36, 37, was signs at the theater, at the swimming pool, at the soccer stadium, no Jews allowed. No Jews allowed. There were signs everywhere. Many were in the grocery stores, the signs. Many were in the other stores. And so it was very limited where my parents and I and my sister could go. Osnabrück was a city where there were a number of Jewish businesses, including stores, most of them fashion stores, selling clothing and jewelry and the like. From one day to the next, these stores would suddenly be looted, and the owners were just told to get out and not to come back, and the business were taken over by the members of the Nazi party. So in 1938, the mayor suddenly announced that he wanted to take our synagogue, and he wanted to tear it down and to build a headquarters for the SS. You saw the beautiful picture of the synagogue, and my father at that time was the only practicing Jewish lawyer. There was one other one, but for some reason, which I don't want to explain in detail now, he was in prison. So my father was the only Jewish attorney, and he tried very hard to keep the synagogue from being taken over by the mayor, who was a big Nazi, and to be destroyed. He tried some legal action, and he was authorized as a trustee and officer on the board of our synagogue to try every way to keep the synagogue in Jewish hands and to keep it having services every Saturday. In addition, there was some desecration of the Jewish cemetery in 1938. And my father, again, was given the assignment by the Jewish congregation to try to have repairs made and to punish the young people and from who did the destroying and the desecration. So my father was active in court, which sadly caused him to be killed in October 1938. It was a Saturday, and we had a garden apart from our house, about a mile away, and he would go there to read. Remember, this is 1938, and he can no longer, for years, practice for Christian clients, and he could still practice for some Jewish clients, but of course they were leaving, and so he had plenty of time to read. This was a Saturday morning.
Okay, it's okay, take your time.
And I went to synagogue. My mother was home, and he went to our garden to read. I came home about 1 o'clock after services. My mother was preparing lunch, and we were expecting my father to come home. And she got a phone call from the hospital, and they told her to come to the hospital, and she rushed to the hospital. When she returned to tell me that my father had died. Now, she wouldn't tell me how, but she said it was a heart problem. So he was buried in his hometown of Hildesheim, and so exactly a month later, like the pastor just said, came Kristallnacht, and here was the opportunity to destroy the synagogue. Our synagogue was completely desecrated and actually set on fire. But I told you in one of the early photos that there was a big building, government building next to it. So the firemen actually came to put out the fire, not to protect the synagogue, but to protect the government building next to it. Now, on that night, Kristallnacht, all Jewish families in Germany were visited. I call it a visit. It was much worse than that, but they were troops in uniform to arrest every Jewish man and to take him to a concentration camp. So they came to our house, and they said to my mother, in the middle of the night, they knocked on the door, and we of course didn't know that our synagogue had been destroyed, but they said, "We're looking for men, where's your husband?" And my mother said, "I'm a widow, he's not alive." So they pointed to me, and they said, "How old is he?" And she said, 10. And they said, "That's too young." And we didn't know what that meant. But obviously, it meant the next day we learned that it was too young to be taken to the concentration camp. All the Jewish men in Germany that were taken to concentration camps that night, and the next day, were released within a month. Because this is 1938. The concentration camps really were not activated, for the worst things that happened later on until 1940-41. So the next morning, of course, I didn't know what had happened. I went to school and I saw this, how the synagogue and the school were completely destroyed. And I ran home to my mother, and my mother at that time had been called and told about Kristallnacht. Now that's, of course, I never went back to school. I very, very rarely left the house after that day. Now this is November 1938. My parents had tried to get to the United States for more than a year. And you had to apply, and you had to not only be on a waiting list, but you had to have a sponsor who completely told the government, we will support these people when they come, from the time they come. Luckily, my mother had a brother who went to the United States in the 1920s, and he lived in New York, and he promised to take care of the family, my mother and me. Now, my sister graduated from our school in 1937, and there was no high school for her to go to. So she was able to come to the United States in 1937 and live with the uncle who had 3 children. So there became 4 children, all about the same age, 14, 15, 16, 17. And so finally, we got the word that we could come to the United States. And we needed big, big, big help, because not only did you have to list every asset, everything you owned, every piece of clothing had to be listed, how it was acquired, what it was worth. And we were able to do that with the help of a gentleman, a lawyer, Dr. Kreft, K-R-E-F-T. Now, the Kreft family and the Jacobson family had been best friends for many, many years. As a matter of fact, Kreft had a son by the name of Wolfgang, who was 3 months older than I am, and we lived like 10 houses apart, and our mothers wheeled us together from young age. And we grew up together and played together every day until 1933, when his parents told him and my parents told me that I could no longer see or play with Wolfgang Kreft, and his parents told the same thing. So when we saw each other on the street, we couldn't even wave to each other when we were 5 years old. And but my father and Wolfgang's father had stayed the closest of friends, and so Adolf Kreft, the father, helped us tremendously to get out of the country. Without his help, we never would have made it. And he helped us in preparing all the documents, getting the passports, etc., etc. Let me show them. Now this is just a sign, a badge that all the Jews in Germany had to wear starting in 1938. Now this is one of the documents that was necessary before we could leave. As I mentioned, we had to list all our bank accounts and all property, and we couldn't keep any property. Our house, the garden property, everything had to be sold. There was an amount of 8,000 marks that was owed to my parents, my father. And so the man was told, Kreft told him, you have to pay the Jacobsons because they have to leave. So he wrote a letter to the government in Hanover to get permission to pay the 8,000 marks to my parent, to my mother. And he signs his letter, Heil Hitler, not any other way, not the way you and I would sign any letter in the United States. Yours truly, or whatever. They signed the letter, Heil Hitler. Now, this is a deed to sell the property. Of course, you need the stamp with the swastika on it. And one of the first declarations in this deed is my mother has to state that she's a Jew. In about 4 lines from the top, she has to declare that she's a Jew. The next, you cannot believe what the German government imposed on these people. Now here's another great picture. It shouldn't be in this sequence. But Nussbaum painted this picture of a man in hiding. He's wearing his Jewish badge and he's holding his ID papers. You had to have ID papers. And you can see what a great painter this was. At this time, there is a major museum called the Nussbaum Museum, really, or the Nussbaum House, whatever. And it has his major artworks contributed by many people and some by the German government. He was killed in a concentration camp, and as was his wife. And my father was the attorney for Nussbaum and his parents. Now this is the passport that my mother and I had to come to this country in 1939. It has a big J to identify you clearly as a Jew. It has the sermon, the swastika in the eagle, and it gives my mother's name and her maiden name. Difficult to get. Now here's a picture. Why don't we go back?
To where?
This is after I'm here.
You want me to?
Yeah, I want to go back.
You want to go to this?
Yeah. Now before we could leave, we had great trouble. There is actually a traveling exhibition in Germany right now of the listing of all the assets that we had to make. It had to show all my clothing, whether we bought it or whether it came down from my father, and what we paid for it, what the condition was, and so forth. It's a thick book that we had to do. Every bit of clothing, every piece of furniture, everything in the house. When my mother sold the house and the garden, she of course didn't get a proper price. Everything, because a Jew had to sell under great pressure, it was undervalued. But that really didn't matter, because in order to leave the country, you had to pay a tax. It was called the Reichsfluchtsteuer. Steuer is tax, Flucht is fleeing, Reich is a German Reich. So it was a tax to flee the country. And it was the shortest tax return you will ever see. The first line was the assets, and as I say, everything had been reduced to cash. And the next line was the tax, and the tax was 100%. So my mother and I left Germany on my birthday, 11 years old, January 15, 1939. And we came on an American ship, left from Hamburg, and 10-day trip, very tough weather, and but we were able to come with 50 marks. That's all they would allow us to carry. And of course we were welcomed in New York by my sister and the cousins and so forth, and we were able to live with another cousin in Jackson Heights, New York, until later in the year, September, we moved to Flushing, New York. My mother and I had an apartment, and my sister was with us part-time, but she, in order to make money for us, she worked for a family as a nanny, etc., and made some money, and I went to work, and this is funny, I went to work in Flushing in a grocery store, and I made 25 cents an hour. So I worked a full day, Saturday and Sunday, and I was able to make $5, including some tips for delivery orders, a nickel or a dime. But $5 was big money because a quart of milk was 10 cents and a loaf of bread was 10 cents. So,
You want to go into the...
yeah, so with my sister bringing in some money, and my mother went to work immediately and made some money, and we were able to live on that little money without needing any help from the uncle. I want to go back to the picture.
Oh, boy. This one here?
Yeah.
Okay.
When I started school in Flushing, they welcomed me with music and a flag, and I'm the smallest one in the picture. But that was late 1939. Now,
You want me to...
I'm going to go back. Yeah, Vivian can show you this book. It's a great big book. In the 1980s, Israel asked the German cities to publish books about the Jewish citizens and the faiths of the Jewish citizens. And so, because I lived in Chicago and they only had the address in New York, Vivian and I never got the book until the late 1980s. And when we looked at the book and read about my family, it said that my father had committed suicide. And so I knew that wasn't true. I wasn't true.
Can I take over from here and let you rest your voice a little? I'm going to continue on with this because this, believe it or not, your former chaplain, Bobby Black, was very...
I stayed here because of the camera.
I'm sorry.
No, because of the camera.
I'll tell you.
So we get this book, and Ralph is out on the golf course, and he's coming home at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And my German was good enough to see that there was this small little notice which covered all the German Jewish families in Osnabrück, Germany, that my father-in-law had committed suicide. So, of course, Ralph and I thought that his father had died of a heart attack. My father died of a heart attack, so we knew it was a lie. You know, there's no way that this could be happen. So we kept talking about it, and he kept saying, you know, but my father wanted to come to the United States. My father, this.
I want to add, it also said that he hanged himself, which is even worse and impossible for him to have done that, of course.
So about 10 days after we found out about this book, and you know, I thought, you know, where's the marriage going? We don't have a conversation or anything except his father and how he died. And he didn't commit suicide, and he couldn't have committed suicide. So Ralph was out playing golf about 10 days later, and I went over to Pinehurst. Gisela Danielson had a little travel agency, and I bought a ticket, and I told her I wanted to go to Osnabrück, Germany, and he walked in the door, and I told him I'm leaving for Germany because we have to find out what happened to your father, and we have to confront this head on. And so I went to Germany. Ralph had great trepidation about my going. The people in Germany, in Osnabrück, the community called me a very brave person, but I was a woman who wanted to get on with her life and get on with her marriage and figure out what happened to my father-in-law. So I met with the German people, and we were able to get into the archive to find the death certificate and of this my father-in-law, and it was very clear that the death certificate was very clear: suicide by hanging. And So I just kept saying, you know, this is not possible. I'm married to this wonderful man. He had a wonderful father. This could not be. So when I had to confront Ralph with the documents that came from the archive, do you remember we used to have the airport in Southern Pines here? And I was flying from Osnabrück to Frankfurt, Frankfurt to Charlotte, and Charlotte to Southern Pines. And when I got to the Charlotte airport, I called Bobby Black, who was the minister of this church, and a very, very good friend of Ralph's, because we did not have a rabbi in our community at that time. And I had to have somebody to help me to tell my husband that these are the documents. So when Ralph came to pick me up at the airport in Southern Pines, and on the way home, I said, Bobby Black is coming, and it was at 10 o'clock at night. And he's going to sit with us, and we're going to discuss the documents that I got from your father from the archives in Osnabrück. I remember this evening. So Bobby came and we talked, and he explained to us in as much as well as a rabbi, even though he was a minister of the church. And I kept talking to Bobby all the time. What should we do? What should we do? And so the conclusion was to have Ralph go to Germany himself and confront the people at the mayor's office and the people at the archives. So this is the book, and I'm going to talk about this.
Can you translate this side?
Ralph, do you want to give the translation for this?
Well,
Excuse me, I'm sorry. We're going to get back to that. I'm sorry. Here we go.
it says stations on the way to Auschwitz instead of stations on the way to the cross. It says Entrechnung means having your rights taken away. Vertreibung means being driven out physically. Vernichtung means complete annihilation. Jews in Osnabrück, 1900 to 1945. Now this book has been honored because of the way it was prepared and the detail and so forth, and we became good friends with the people who wrote the book. Now I have to go back to one thing. When we went to the offices to get the records about my father's death, one of the first things it said was that he was found by my mother and a woman giving her name. Now that woman had never been at our garden. She didn't even know we had one. It was a very private garden. My mother, as I mentioned, was never in the garden that day. She was home when I came from services and we were waiting for my father. So we again confronted the German official who said that in 1938 the German government didn't want to admit that they were killing people, so they either reported it as a suicide, or they made it into an automobile accident, or they made it into some kind of form where they weren't accused of killing Jews. So with all of that proof, my friend Wolfgang Kreft and his son, also a lawyer, wrote a long brief saying that there should be a new death certificate issued for my father, and based on their brief, the mayor of Osnabrück established and issued a new death certificate for my father.
Okay, let me go on to the next period.
But
I want to talk about it. Can we go forward on this again? Something happened? Oh, wait. I want to go back to this. Okay.
This is a very interesting picture. This is Ralph's childhood friend, Wolfgang Kraft. And here's Ralph. The message tonight is you can kill millions of people in a war, but you cannot kill a friendship. Wolfgang was just 91. Ralph was going to be 91. Since the day they reunited in 1998, they talk constantly. They're on the phone. They write each other letters. They talk about their families, about the stock market, politics, opera. So what's interesting about this is that when I came in 1994 on my own, Wolfgang Kraft told me that the saddest day in his life as a child, and having lived through all of Hitler, was that he came to a special place and he wanted to say goodbye to Ralph. Now remember, they were 5 years that they could not speak with each other, right? Because Hitler said Christian children and Jewish children couldn't mix together. So Ralph was coming from the garden and Wolfgang was going someplace, and he said, I passed Ralph. I couldn't even say goodbye to him or wish him well. This is a 10-year-old boy that can't say goodbye to his friend who's going to America. So I said, you know what? We came together in 1996, and we found this corner in Osnabrück, Germany, and I brought the two men together because I wasn't going to let Hitler determine that Wolfgang could not say goodbye to Ralph. And so this picture was taken in 1996. The interesting thing was that Wolfgang said the thing that he missed the most about playing with Ralph was they couldn't play soccer. So prior to this picture being taken, we were walking towards this corner, and there were some kids in like a little alleyway with a ball, a soccer ball. And I went over to them and I asked them if I could borrow the ball. And I gave it to Ralph and I gave it to Wolfgang. And here were these two men playing the soccer back and forth. I have to tell you that this family, the Kraft family, were the Schindler for the Jacobson family. Without this Christian family, even throwing bread over the shrubbery at nighttime because they couldn't go to the grocery store from November 8th all the way to the time that they were able to get out of the country. If it wasn't for their Christian neighbors, they would have starved. The other thing that I find so wonderful about this picture is how they never skipped a beat. From the minute they caught up with each other for the first time in many, many years, it was like just wonderful. Let's go to the other picture. I'm going to talk about...
Adolf Kraft became mayor of Osnabrück for 8 years. Wolfgang became a lawyer and became the head of the whole area of 400,000 people, and he was the leader of the government for that. Here's a picture of us. Again, we couldn't walk together in the park because as the families couldn't. So in about 1996, 1977, this picture was taken.
So I sent this picture to Wolfgang. It's like, the Joseph Karsh photo of Pablo Casal playing the cello, and you just see the cellist from the back. Because Wolfgang said, besides the fact that we couldn't play soccer, my father and I would walk on one side of the forest, and there was a little stream, and Ralph and his father were on the other side, and all I wanted to do was to run around and play with Ralph. So we went back to that forest, just like I found the street corner where they passed each other, and we went back to it. And I sent this picture
to Wolfgang, and he writes me back a letter. Call the New York Times and tell them that the World War II ended March 16th, 1998. Is that a great picture?
And go to the next one. Every time that we visit my father's grave in Osnabrück, Wolfgang goes with us, and we pray together, and he puts a stone on the grave marker, which is a kind of a symbol to do. But after World War II, of course, ended, the mothers became very good friends again, and we sent packages of food to the Kreff family, and the mothers corresponded until they each died at the age of 90 plus.
I think we're gonna. Oh, this is a great picture. This is Ralph speaking at the Carolina Gymnasium, and I'm here is Wolfgang, who spoke to the class of what it was like to be a Christian being raised in World War II under Hitler. And then Ralph spoke about his childhood, and they spoke in German. And the question, Ralph has spoken to a lot of high schools in Germany and college prep classes. And the number one question they ask Ralph is, are you angry at us?
No, do you hate us?
Do you hate us?
And I say, no, I don't hate you, but you cannot forget. You can never forget what happened. I forgive, but I do not.
This is the Sophie Scholl White Rose Society of a group of Christian students in Germany who fought Hitler, and because he was against the Bolsheviks, he was against the gays, he was against the Jehovah's Witnesses and disabled people, and they formed this group. Unfortunately, they were murdered.
At one of the schools, they gave me a painting of that rose, which I presented to Wolfgang Kreff and his family. So they have the painting of
and then
rose.
This is the book, one of the Abendgymnasium, the evening school, had a program to write a small book about Ralph's and his family as part of their class project.
Yeah, there's another book that was written about lawyers having their rights taken away, and it was written by a retired judge, and we became good friends, as we did with the mayor of Osnabrück, and many times in Osnabrück, when I gave a talk, the five of us talked. Wolfgang Kreff, the mayor, the author, the judge, and
This is the document that's now in place in the archive register regarding the death of Ralph's father. If we had time, or if we have a question and answer period, I'll talk about how the Freedom of Information Act in the United States differs from that in Germany. This is called a Stolpersteiner. They started this in Germany, and what it is it's a stepping stone in the sidewalk to notify you that this is where a Jewish family lived, but it's spread among Holland and other countries also besides. So this is the Stolpersteiner for Ralph's father, his mother, for his sister, and that they lived, and it's just opposite to where the house was. And this
the house that I lived in was destroyed in World War II in a bombing raid.
Well, I'm going to show you this picture, and I'm going to show this picture because when they had this Anwalt ohne Recht, Lawyers Without Rights exhibition, they invited Ralph to come and speak in the courthouse. Over 200 people.
300.
Huh?
300.
300. It was just packed. And, you know, the thing that was so interesting was here was Ralph speaking in German in the very courthouse that his father's rights were taken away from. So, hello Hitler, what did you
I want to go back. I want to go back and say something.
Okay, we're going to finish up because
Yes, before we come, I have spoken in many, many places in the United States giving the similar talk, and at universities and many other places. One of the early speeches I gave right here in this room, and we mentioned Bobby Black before. Bobby Black held the Bible. He was a minister here for many years, a retired colonel of the Air Force, a magnificent person, and we became close friends. He held the Bible when I was sworn in as an attorney in Carthage at the courthouse during the courthouse hearing. And we became the biggest friends, and sadly he passed away a few months ago. And he always addressed me as Your Honor. I became Your Honor. And of course, I did a lot of pro bono legal work, including actually some work for the chapel. And we became such close friends, and I have to tell you a funny story. When I was about 65 years old, we had lunch, Vivian and I, at the hotel. They served great lunches back in those days, very inexpensive, and wonderful food. Well, at a table, a few tables away, was Bobby Black and 3 members of the synagogue, and he knew it was my birthday. And there were more than 100, there were maybe 150 people in the dining room.
of the church, not of the synagogue.
This was that the
You said synagogue was members of the church.
members of the church. And,
This is a great accomplishment.
we were in this beautiful dining room, and he was very tall and distinguished looking, wearing his
Collar.
collar. And he said, "Attention please, today is the birthday of His Honor Ralph Jacobson, and I want everybody to sing happy birthday." And everybody, 150 people got up and sang happy birthday. That was Bobby Black and our great, great, great friendship.
So we're going to finish up with this letter, okay? Because, you know.
Yeah.
So what
I talked to the school in Fayetteville, and I usually get quite a number of letters, but this is the most beautiful letter I ever received. I'm going to let Vivian.
Dear Mr. and Mrs. Jacobson, you all coming to the school and speaking to us about the Holocaust really helped me. It helped me understand in a better way what went on during the Holocaust. People just talked about Hitler, but you all went much deeper and personal. I like the way Mr. Jacobson was all able to hold back the tears. Right? It's all right to cry sometimes, though. It was also nice, Mrs. Jacobson, how you helped him out. Your speech, Mr. and Mrs. Ralph Jacobson. Sincerely, Joe Gee. And then it says, thank you for your story. It changed my life. And I'm happy to tell you that once Ralph went to Germany, he came back. He did not stop going to the schools. I bet you we've talked to, between Moore County and other schools in the area, and we've talked to about 10,000 children, and we always That's a long time to give a lecture. Questions?
If y'all are up to it.
Sure. Otherwise, I have to go home and do the dishes.
I'd like to start with a question for Ralph. How would you respond
Do you have the mic on?
What?
Is your mic on?
Yes. How would you respond to Jewish people who have lost their faith in God because of the Holocaust?
Of course, that's very, very sad to see, and I am really unable to explain it. I mean, we see incidents like the saddest, what happened in Pittsburgh within the last month, and so many other incidents of violence, and people say, how can that happen, especially in a synagogue? And how can these terrible acts happen? I am unable to explain it, of course, but I have faith, and I pray quietly in the morning and at night, and I say the same prayer 4 times, once for myself, once for my entire family, once for all my friends, and once the same prayer again for all the people that are ailing, and I wish that they recover quickly. So I cannot explain people not having faith. I wish I could, but I think we all have to believe, and we have to live good lives, and we have to do good deeds. So that is the only answer that I might have.
Thank you.
We can take a question.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
I'm just curious as to your hometown.
I'm gonna walk over here so I can.
Put it close to your mouth.
Well,
I'm just curious as to his hometown, where it is located relative to the other
okay,
cities.
where is Osnabrück located?
Osnabrück is in the northern part of Germany. It is on a straight line, really, like from Amsterdam going west, it's below Hamburg, and it's about 100 miles from Hanover, which is a major city in northern Germany. Osnabrück probably has a population right now of about 175,000 people.
Personally, for me, I think Ralph's story is a story of reconciliation. I think it's one thing to reconcile with your church. I think it's another to be your brother-in-law, you know, politically, whatever. But, you know, he reconciled with the country. And it takes a lot of guts to do that. Yeah. A lot of guts.
I would like to know how he met you.
How did you well, if you didn't have faith in God, you better be ready for it now. My friend Vivian is here. She can tell the story. The question is, how did Ralph and I meet? Very briefly, he had come out of the Army working for the government in Chicago. I had gone to Boston University, had come home for a semester because they raised the tuition in the boarding room, and I wanted to work for a semester and go back to school. So I had this wonderful boyfriend who was at Harvard, and I loved him, and I wanted to go back to Boston so I could be with him.
And my mother said, you can't sit around and wait for him. You know, we're all in that age bracket where, you know, when you were 19, 20 years old, you didn't wait to get married at 30, or your parents pushed you there. So I thought, okay, I'll just keep my mother quiet and I'll go out with other guys. And so I called all my girlfriends and I said, just fix me up. I don't care if they're... Just to keep my mother quiet because I wanted to marry Bernie. And so one day this Ralph went to take the bar examination in Illinois, and they called out Jacobson, and another man answered Jacobson also, and they met afterwards, and he said, I'm Steve Jacobson from New York, and Ralph said, I'm from Ralph Jacobson. And so they had just come to Chicago, and he and his wife had just gotten married. Well, the very same day, if you don't believe in God, this is a story. And the very same day that Steve and Ralph Jacobson got together, in that moment, I was in Marshall Fields in Chicago, having come down from the upstairs. I was a tennis player. They didn't have sporting goods stores there, so you had to go to Marshall Fields to buy a tennis racket. And I was coming
Can
down.
I just interrupt to say we met on a blind date? I have to add that this gentleman in Boston calls me regularly and thanks me for coming.
This friend of mine, Diane, I said, Diane in Trillagator, and she says, she shows me her rings, and she says, the name is Jacobson. So, in that very same day, I met and we had gone to school together at Boston University, and she had married Steve Jacobson. And they called, they said, you know, we want to introduce you, and I said, just send them on over, you know. And my mother fell in love with Ralph. And she fell in love with Ralph, and her sisters fell in love with Ralph. And these were the Epstein girls from Łódź, Poland. And it was like an army. If Hitler would have gone and invaded Poland in 1939, and the Epstein women would have been at the Polish border, he would have turned around and said, banded together, we went out 12 times and we got married, and we're going to be married 62 years in my sisters made a very good decision for me. Yeah.
I heard a story that there were 6 million Jews killed right after World War II. And there were that many people.
After the war.
Or after,
during the war.
Oh, okay. Well, there are a lot of people that don't believe that, but the story is, I hope, accurate, that there were 6 million Jews killed.
Yeah, that's it.
Anybody heard that?
Yes, and that is history in its finest, and I will tell you that the Boyd Library at the college has an outstanding collection of books on the Holocaust and on World War II, and just get yourself, you know, wonderful.
Sheila's family and my family, probably 100 people lost here.
Okay. Do we have any other questions? Thank you for letting me tell you how I met Ralph.
And Jim, it wasn't just Jews, it was a lot of marginalized people.
But there were 11 million.
Along with
There
them.
were 11 million.
That's right.
6 million are probably
That's right. Well, Ralph and Vivian, thank you. This has been such a blessing.
Oh, okay.
And I promise to come back, and because this wasn't long enough. We need to have you back.
I very much would like to give Chagall and the Bible for your congregation.
I do want to add one other thing, that not only were we close friends with the chapel, but our little Jewish synagogue, before we had a synagogue, we held so many services here.
In this room.
In this room. And we were allowed to use the kitchen. And we thank you again for everything that the chapel has done for our little Jewish organization.
Well, consider this. Thank you all for being here this evening, and we will definitely try to get them back. Thank you.